we are ready with the show. And thank you everybody for joining in. Today we have a very talented and very well-known designer with us, Rohit Gulati. He's one of the principals at Incubis, which is currently located in Gurgaon. Earlier used to be quite close to our college in Okhla. And Rohit has come to our campus. He's familiar with the place. So though we are doing this virtually, I'm sure he can relate to the place where we all belong. The other thing I wanted to say is that Incubis is, but Rohit, I guess, will correct me if I'm wrong, but Incubis is a very interesting practice because they do all kinds of design all together. So right from architecture to interior architecture to graphic design to product design. They work with clients in developing programs and briefs. They were the people who were behind the Ginger Hotel. The entire concept of the Ginger Hotel, which they worked with the Taj Group. They have done many things, including stadiums. So their scale of operation is mind-boggling. They have moved from very small to very large, and with ease and comfort. And that, I think, comes from the fact that they are very committed people in Incubis, both Rohit and Amit, his elder brother. So Amit is a product designer from NIT, and Rohit is an architect from TVB School of Habitat Studies, which at one point when it existed used to be the cutting edge school of architecture, giving serious competition to the established ones. And students who have graduated from there have all proven themselves to be quite exceptional in their work. Now, the reason why we requested Rohit to come and speak to us was that the whole famous unknown Barista story is our chief interest here, which is what I think Rohit will focus upon. So he will tell us the entire story, but I would like to give a brief introduction to this project from my perspective, which is the coffee drinker's perspective, though I'm not allowed to drink coffee anymore. But I remember many years ago, a friend of mine telling me, hey, there's a great coffee place in Vasant Vihar shopping complex. Have you been there? And I said, no, haven't even heard about it. So he said, next time you go there, you must check it out. So I went to see a movie at Priya, and sure enough, right next to Priya, in one of the side streets, there was this very interesting, very welcoming looking coffee shop called Barista. And I had no idea that Rohit was behind it at that time, though I knew Rohit from before that. And so my wife and I, we just walked in and we ordered coffee, and we saw all those games lying around, guitars lying around, and it was like nothing like what we were expecting, because the coffee shop that one was familiar with in India was the United Coffee House or the India Coffee Home. Both were quite different from each other, but totally different from Barista. And the coffee itself was great, and it became a bad habit, kept coming back, and then Barista grew in leaps and bounds, sprung up across the country. Wherever I went on work, while driving down from the airport, I would spot a Barista in some corner or the other. Very often, I would go to that place because I knew that I would get a good place to sit in. Nobody will chase me out, and I could have a decent snack and have a cup of coffee in between work. And I used to frequent the Friends Colony Barista quite often from my place of work, which was near Maharani Bagh, especially if I had to run away from office because people were troubling me and I wanted to think by myself. So this is the space, this is the brand that Rohit and Incubis built up from scratch. This is a totally homegrown place. Am I right, Rohit?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there are no foreign collaborations of any kind. And this is what is so amazing. And this, of course, happened before we opened up even more to foreign collaborations like Starbucks and Costa and all the rest of them. And it still, in my mind, was the best place to go to. The one opposite, IIT, was always thriving because of the students. That's another place I used to go to because it was close to a client's office. So having said all of that and built up the hype, I leave it to Rohit now to take it on. Thank you so much, Rohit.
Okay.
All yours.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And Sachin and IIAD, always a pleasure to interact with you. And I can feel it that, every year things are getting better at IIAD. And so Thank you, Snehanshu, for the introduction. And just to kick it off, I think Barista is one of those, early projects that one has worked on and is still one of our favorite projects. So let me take you to 1999, where this is the story no one knows about. So basically, we were a young team of about 4 or 5 people in a small 200 square feet office, imagining what to do next. So we came up with this, and this was when there is no client around. So we were just thinking on, new ideas and seeing what we could do next to, in our spare time. So we thought, yes, this was the age, where the iMac was coming in, internet. There were a lot of these small internet cafes going around, where you just went to check internet. There were no coffee shops apart from those either in five-star hotels or, high street retail, but there was nothing in between. So we started imagining this cafe where one could spend time, uh, you know, uh, it's not home, it's not office, it's something in between. So we started imagining the space, and we said it's a good, and we just started using computer modeling, just a year or two out of college. So we started experimenting on 3D modeling and some design concepts on our own. So we started modeling this sort of cafe space. What would the tables look like? So it was like a sort of practice session for everything else. So we started, imagining this cafe, what it could look. It could be a juice bar, it could be a coffee bar. So we were just sort of imagining what it could be, and ultimately we. Destiny plays its part. We got a client who started chatting with us and said, what is the next? So we showed him some of these ideas that we had already done. So he got interested. He started pushing us and said, okay, let's start thinking it in a little more detail. So we defined what Barista could be and what it stood for. So we said it's a contemporary, minimal, spacious, free. It's a space, inviting space where you can spend time, which is not time in office, not time in home. It's a place to gather, meet, or be alone, and find time for self, contemplation. So this is where we came in, and so we didn't really get into the concept straight away. We actually started doing research because and I think this is the DNA of every project that one does, is to first research. So we looked around, there were not too many sort of examples in India. A few friends of ours and classmates were holidaying in Europe at that time. So we said, okay, while you are there, why don't you look at coffee shops and sort of give us a report on different types of coffee shops in Austria, Switzerland. So they were on a holiday. So we said, why don't you sort of take this up as well in parallel? So they made a report for us. In parallel, the client asked us to we visited 2-3 we went to Southeast Asia where there were, Singapore, Bangkok, and all, where this sort of idea was sort of taking root. And of course, in the US, there was already Starbucks was already on its startup mode. So there was a lot of international benchmarking and design exploration. And this led to the next step, on defining what the concept is, taking inspiration from the coffee, true Italian ethos of coffee making, from the visuals of the exciting coffee machines, the art, and the lifestyle that is associated with it. And that went into a next stage, with concept sketches. These are all hand-drawn and hand-colored sketches done in sort of late 1999. So, these were the early ideas of what Barista could look like. And by early sort of first, I think it was, I'm forgetting, maybe January or February of 2000, when we did more. They selected the same Vasant Vihar site, and as a precursor, they set up a coffee training academy on the upper floors and the basement. So, and the site, so their client already had an office there on the. So he cleared up the ground floor for us, and shifted his office upstairs. We created a barista training academy and a coffee tasting, because a lot of research was also happening on the back end on how to operate a coffee shop. So, and in the basement was a training academy for the staff and about barista and its ethos. So these were the early concepts we done, and this culminated into opening of the first store at Vasant Vihar. So what is interesting is that every element was designed, including the furniture, the tables, there's nothing except for a few standard equipment that was bought off the shelf, because there wasn't really much available to use off the shelf. So it's, everything was customized, prototype, and taken off. So you can, looking back, you can see the old type monitors on the table. So we completed the first site, and immediately the response was quite good. So they said, okay, let's do one or two more. So we started refining our ideas, and this was the definition of the identity of the space. So we experimented with, this is the one, I think, store in Defense Colony. So we experimented, taking the idea of bringing an Italian piazza into a store as a concept. So different type. This was, I think, at Ansel Plaza, this one. So we did a first set of 4-5 stores, in addition, which sort of refined the detailing that we were already doing. The graphics got improved, and the menu board. So all this started happening in the next few months, and by that time the client, based on this experience of the initial few stores, got additional funding for a rollout which was very aggressive in that sense. So between 2001 and 2003 we did over 150 stores across the country. So it was really and in order to have consistency, what we defined, which became the DNA of the entire operation, was a design manual. So that, so everyone from the designers, the operators, the contractors, everyone is clued into what exactly is the end result is required in the minimum amount of time, and of course, keeping cost in control. So we developed this design element which defined each and every element that went into a store. So every element, because we had done 4-5 stores already, we knew what it looked like. We put in all the drawings, dimensions, and the specifications into a booklet, about 50-page booklet, which sort of defined everything that went into it. So all the key elements, the counter, the furniture, and this is supported by detailed technical drawings, so that any contractor at site will not go wrong, because this is what defines the identity, which basically is a sort of medium to translate the idea into working drawing and which results in consistency of the product at the other end. So even small details and hardware were developed because these were not readily available at that time. So so what would a typical layout look like? What are the specifications of the tile, color, how the skirting and the edges need to look like? What are the lighting? So every element was looked at in detail, right down to the newspaper rack, which had a sort of flowing curve. It has an embossed Barista symbol. So even if you go to some of the older sites, some of these elements are still there, even after 15, 20 years. So which is quite nostalgic in some sense. And so while the Indian operations was growing, at that time, Lavazza of Italy, which is one of the world's leading coffee chains and coffee equipment manufacturers, sort of invested into Barista because they found that at a global level, this was more Italian than any other global chain at that time, which sort of represented the Italian ethos. So it was like sort of vindication of the thought process, and they put in more money into the system, and they started expanding internationally, especially in the Middle East and South Asia, a few in Sri Lanka, but mainly in the Middle East, to look at, so by the time we looked at that, we figured out that, what we were doing in India needs to evolve ahead. So now we are probably in around 2003, 2004. So and the business itself was changing. There were franchise models, ownership models, expectations at a global level were quite different from, but we felt that we need to keep the ethos consistent, but the design concept definitely needs to move out of a cookie cutter model to a more, I would say, flexible model, but without changing the DNA. So in parallel, the client also moved in its operations, went into a much larger office space, which we also designed. So we made sure that the culture of the space, that basically the entry into the office is through the cafe. So which was also open to public. It was in a multi-use building. So the coffee shop itself defined the entry point to the company. So at the back also there was a culture of openness, open plan offices, and coming through. So we designed their office in parallel, and so this was the whole basis for the evolution. To basically create a distinct sense of evolution. It's a familiar ambience and a sense of place that is appropriate to the context. So, you take in some of the local ethos back into the cafe and vice versa. It should not necessarily become like McDonald's, which, you go with a rubber stamp across the board. So we developed these were broad variations of the theme that we started looking at, which are more international and contextual, depending on where they were located. So, different ideas how to basically invigorate the same brand over again. So these were the new ideas that we started creating that would then feed back into the design detailing depending on the context. So these are a few examples where we started competing with other brands. This was, I think, somewhere in Dubai, where it was actually just next to a Starbucks. And at times, Barista was more popular than people going into Starbucks. So that felt very nice for us. So we did quite a few stores in the Southeast, in the Middle East, Bahrain, Oman, and things like that. So you'll see that design elements keep changing, but ultimately it's a barista without necessarily putting a logo on it. So it became a little more contextual and appropriate to the place. So so we created new elements, but the ethos remained the same in that sense. So this was around in 2001, 2002. This is in Sri Lanka in the Golf Face Hotel in Colombo. So part of the heritage hotel was actually then restored by us to bring in a barista back into it. So this became quite a popular destination in Colombo as well. So we retained the heritage elements of the old hotel, brought in a sort of new vibe and retained the structure, but still retained the ethos of the place. So these were in high-end malls in Dubai and Bahrain. So where we changed the context, we changed the furniture, but the ethos somewhat remained. The intent was to retain the brand identity. Then, because the market business also started changing, more food courts started coming up. Real estate became very expensive. Suddenly, in the late around 2005 to 2007, because of the real estate boom. So retail outlet spaces started shrinking. We started developing kiosks, and which could either go into a mall or a mall atrium or a food court sort of situation. Or so we kept changing the brand design and detailing to meet the market and the clients and expectations. And imagining spaces like an outdoor plaza, Italian plaza, so where it could be out of like a open air situation rather than inside a mall or something. So we were at one time there were by this time there were about 8 or 10 people who were actually working only on the barista account, and 5 of them were actually deputed in the barista office, and 5 were in our office, and we were sort of doing so that coordination, because they were churning out a few stores every week. So it required very close coordination with the client, on a daily and hourly basis in that sense. So, and ultimately, in certain situations, like this project in Dubai, this was a lounge bar within the Saks Fifth Avenue departmental store. So the back end here was barista, but none of the barista elements were utilized because so the back end barista was, and this lounge was again designed by us. So here the ethos and the brand identity is completely different, but the bar and bar operations were all run by baristas. So this was a sort of where you sort of invert the whole game to a completely new brand identity, but the back end was barista. So I'd like to sort of try and summarize what I've been trying. So, the key question of how does good design happen and what is good design? So, and I think in any project, this is true for any project, that you have to start with the fundamental questions: that why do you need this design? Who is the user? What are the benefits? What is the sustainability of such an exercise? Will it be profitable? So you need to address all these issues right at the beginning and at periodic situations to make sure the brand can sustain itself. So, and I think internally and externally, we try and propagate that, good design happens through the right thought, co-creation and delivery. And all these 3 things are pretty important to, create something that has value and now looking back, it's been over 20 years since we started looking at Barista, and we still work on a few Barista projects now and then because of the company is not in too good shape for different reasons. But but I think what is important is to develop a product that is co-created, because then there is value for everyone in the whole exercise. And looking at good design, other values, you have to place users before the self. You have to be ethical, empathy, and rooted to the context. It has to be aspirational, because otherwise you don't want to do something that's already been done earlier. You need to resolve opposing ideas. You need to be innovative, think differently, experiment, and to create an experiential space and identity. And of course, look at sustainability in what we do. So basically, this is what we feel is a process. At the back of it is a process that we also keep refining, so that you create surprise and and you create a sort of stickiness with the users, the promoters, and the people who are part of the process. So I think we can now share and open up for questions and any comments that you would like to clarify.
So thank you enormously, Rohit. That was a presentation which is perfect for a design school. And I'm so grateful that you talked about research right in the beginning, because it was just today morning I was trying to emphasize the importance of research before starting a design, and you said it without me, telling you in advance that you should say this. So it's just a coincidence. But I'm so glad you said it that way. But the other interesting thing that I noticed was the way you people moved from hand drawings to computer-aided work.
Yeah.
And somehow, I mean, I'm old-fashioned in some senses. Somehow, I find that the hand drawing concept sketches and drawing developments have far more soul than the computer-aided ones. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah, I think we feel it's a bit of, see, the computer is a great tool, but what you can resolve by doing even dirty sketches, small sketches and all, are far more efficient than any computer aided tool that, at least that's the way I work. So even if someone in my team is doing a computer model, is doing a CAD drawing, I have to take a print and sketch over it, and then I can understand it better. Unless I see it, unfortunately, that also sometimes wastes a lot of printing, but I feel it is from what could take 3 hours on 4 Zoom calls and WhatsApp can be done in 5 minutes.
Yes.
Over across the table and on a piece of paper. So that is fundamental to, I would say, also to emulate and indoctrinate yourself into the design process. So that, I think, is a tool that I don't think we can give up on.
Yes. Also, I feel that when you do things by hand on paper using color pencils, like the sketches you showed or the drawings you showed, it brings the design more clearly out in your own mind.
Yes, it's a process to reflect internally, resolve it internally, and then take it to the next level. So, it's, I would say, though personally, I'm not so good at doing the final sketches or the presentations. My sketches are very scratchy and dirty. But I think, irrespective of that, I think the process is more important than the output of those sketches.
Yeah, absolutely. So here I would ask the students to ask their questions. So Sachin, what's the process? They can ask directly or they have to type it on the chat?
They can either share their questions in the Q&A section or in that section. Otherwise, if you say, we can allow all of them to speak as well.
Yeah, I think that will be better.
Yeah,
if you can
when we
allow
hear them
to
straight
speak.
away. Yeah.
Sure.
So just whoever wants to ask the question must identify themselves by name and then ask the question. So is there anybody who's raring to go? Okay, so while you guys decide.
I am just allowing all of them to use their mics.
So I must also say that Rohit wears many hats. One of the hats he wears is also that of an academician, same as me. And he is involved in an international course on redefining, teaching an international course with some very illustrious professors, with students from across the world, where they are redefining the way architecture education could be. It's called the BB Star, Building Beauty Star. And so he has that hat as well. So I thought I should say it at the end. So therefore, it will be easy for him to answer questions from a student. So any of the students wish to ask a question?
Hi, students are getting their questions. This is Mani. I teach level 6 currently. Rohit, I met you when you came for the session.
Yeah. Correct.
I just thought it was very interesting that you came up with ideas without having a client. I thought that was most the way an artist approaches the work, that it doesn't matter whether there is anybody to get the idea or not, but whatever creative ideas should be out there. You were wishing a place like that existed, but it didn't. So you conceptualized it and then organically found somebody who was interested in it. So you sort of created your own design brief, and I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Because I think, the most powerful ideas come through self-ideation. And if you are able to focus on, finding what's missing, either in a graphic or in a product or a space, and, this is what this space should look like. And if you can at least explore even to yourself, that simple process sort of teaches you much more than what a client, and it sort of prepares you for a situation which may come 20 years later, so
right.
It's like practice, so you are able to so you've taken all the steps, you've in your mind or through your sketches, you've already resolved 80% of the conflicts that a live project could bring out. And so that sort of self training goes a long way. So it is only a matter of perception. A lot of times you don't necessarily have to even draw it out. If you go to a space, you say, over the years we also do a lot of hotels. So every time I'm in a new hotel, my mind immediately goes, oh, I can do this better. They're messed up in that corner. This detail is good. So you keep training your mind at a, it's like practice makes perfect sort of situation. So that's a method one can to basically look at things a little more critically and an analytical frame of mind. So that always helps.
Thank you so much for that.
So any of the students have questions now to ask?
I would like to take your suggestion on something that is kind of stressing most of us. What we see, the trend of interiors and architecture design as of now is taking a backstep, specifically because of the COVID happening. So my question to you is, what are the kind of skills that these students should take on extra to what they have learned in terms of building themselves for this kind of environment, this kind of keeping 6 feet distance and yet utilizing the space, maintaining the hygiene factors. So what all they should learn extra in terms of interiors and architecture?
Though we've been reading and so looking at these new COVID dependent spaces, but I think more than the physical point of view, on these technicals, 6 feet distance, yes, it helps. You need more screening between partitions in an office, maybe, or your air conditioning system has to be more efficient to fight the bacteria and the parasite. But I think what is going to happen is to look at the mental state of mind a little more critically. That okay, you are taking all these precautions, but I think one needs to look at the environment in a little more, I would say, different point of view. Basically, it will mean that you have more ventilation, naturally ventilated spaces. So instead of relying on technology, you can look at the practical side of things and what a good environment will create. You should have views into gardens or have access into open spaces, even if they are small courtyards. Uh, you have more breakout spaces instead of everyone congregating in one canteen or one thing. You should have the flexibility to move out into different spaces and smaller groups and things like that. So I think these are the things that are actually more exciting to research and to look at. And because people now want to break out of the standard formats. And I think the key is to define what the new format is going to be. So, looking at how apartments are designed internally. So, you've seen work from home, spaces for the self and the family are changing. You need to, plan for multifunctional spaces. You need to, in I think the next revolution, at least in the Western countries, is coming. That are you going to have a kitchen at all in the days to come? Because either you are, so that is one extreme that is being debated, or you are already getting into issues of micro apartments where your living room converts into a study during the day, an entertainment space in the evening, and a bedroom at night. So these are going to be new challenges to look at, but ultimately it all depends on what the client needs and what you feel is going to add value to a space, and then get into it. So I think we are going to have a few exciting projects in the days to come where people will get into renovations, and they want to, I think also the connect with nature has become very important. And this is, I think, a very big learning over the last few months, that people now want to be connected with nature more than sitting in glass boxes. I think that paradigm shift of going back to nature is happening, and I think that's a positive that's taking place. So it's different times ahead.
Yeah, I think now as we see a very minimalistic approach towards developing their own flats or their own apartments whatsoever, people are now definitely, as you said, are now moving towards more nature-based interiors, or are very difficult to rather understand how we can amalgamate the work from home culture into our spaces. Because if I, let's say, take my example, I have to literally lock both my parents and my wife in another room so that they don't disturb while I'm sitting on the dining table, and still kind of fighting with that I space where I can use or I can specifically have a soundproof system. I'm sure these kids need to learn that how to make the present spaces more workable, more minimalistic, and yet with full functionality.
I won't necessarily use the term minimalist. I think I'll use it. You need to design for the fundamentals, which is, as you mentioned, acoustics, privacy, uh, and seclusion for working at home, because the requirements for work and for other house-based activities are quite different. And I think these are the things that one will need to look at in the days to come to sort of change, or at least get into retrofits with the design offices. we used to look at, making the office a bit of a cultural space. But I think now it's going to be reversed, where you need to get a bit of your office at home. So.
Absolutely. Sir, I would like to ask you a question. We have seen a 20-year journey of how Barista was and now what we see Barista today.
Yeah.
I'm sure you must have got a lot of challenges. The client doesn't remain the same. The culture doesn't remain the same.
Yeah.
So if you could help us with some kind of challenges that you faced on a regular basis, and how you managed.
Okay. So what I haven't told you yet is that so the journey I've showed you is basically from, say, 2005 to about 2008. But after that, what has actually happened is for whatever reasons, the ownership of the company has changed hands at least 3 times in that period. So everyone sees potential in it, but unfortunately, what has been lacking is the continuity. Of course, we have been there in bits and starts even up to today, but the management, this sort of business requires continuity of management and continuity of ownership in the same manner. But that unfortunately has not happened with this company because in between, earlier Tata Coffee took a minority stake, then Lavazza took a majority stake, then Tata Coffee again took a majority stake, and then it got sold to another investor who was actually used to run an automotive parts business. So, and they have not, and their core business has sort of gone out of the window over the last 4-5 years. So actually the focus on Barista has diminished. So, unfortunately, those sort of setbacks are there with something that is still a good brand. But I think it needs to be, that someone who has a drive and uses it as not a vehicle for something else, but, develops the brand in itself and for what it stands. So unfortunately, that has not taken place. And so that's the sort of downside. But in terms of challenges, I think that is a fundamental challenge of business like this, because after from 2005, you had other chains like Costa, Cafe Coffee Day sort of came up, had an advantage and still has an advantage because they own the coffee plantations themselves. So their back-end costs were lower. So what they did was they opened a store wherever Barista was. They opened a store right next door and sold coffee at half the rate. So that dented the brand and the profitability of Barista to some extent as well. So Barista had to sort of spend more to keep up with the brand development. So those are the sort of fundamental challenges that will be required to, that brands need to overcome to sort of keep the competition out of there.
So do we have any students now who want to ask questions, or are they content to let us keep the conversation going? No one yet? That's odd. I thought there would be lots of questions from the students.
Anushka, Sushmita, do you guys have anything to say or to ask?
Okay, this is surprising because usually they have a lot of questions, all of them.
Hi, sir.
Yeah, hello.
Hi, sir.
Ask your question, yes.
From L6. I was about to ask about the challenges that you faced during this, but Sachin sir just asked that. However, like I want to specifically ask this thing that as you said that Barista is a brand. It's a global brand. It's spread across Dubai and Middle East countries. So, and you also mentioned that in 2005, nearly in 2003, 2005, you had to change the aesthetics and you had to make some changes in the kind of aesthetics that you are developing. So, in terms with the context of the space, like a barista in India and a barista in Dubai, say as opposed to a barista in the another Middle East, in Sri Lanka maybe, then, what are the challenges you faced in terms of the context, and what were the main key factors which were driving you to make those changes in these different spaces? So, on a context, based on the context. Thank you.
So one was, I think, the 3-4 parts of this how we've attacked these challenges. One was on the aesthetics, because we were suddenly being competing with international brands for the same market in these international markets. So you already had Costa, Starbucks, and 5 other chains. So one had to retain the brand identity and yet compete, on aesthetics, comfort. So if it was a, say, cafe in India, one could probably get away in those days by, bringing in furniture from maybe Malaysia or something. But also the second issue is on brand specifications and things like that. So if you actually were do a store in a Dubai mall, the requirements are pretty stringent. The mall will not allow or any XYZ brand of furniture to be put into their mall. So every bit of hardware has to be certified. It has to meet all the guidelines. So, there are a set of technical standards that need to be met first. The second challenge is to ultimately looking at the colors and the textures and all. So, to look at the local available, things like laminates, color, paint, shade, card. So we had to every time get into a slightly research mode for every sort of country to see what are the best brands available there. We had to rework and re-specify the colors and match it back to our main parent brand standard. So that was a second challenge to you have to get into a vendor development process. And then the third is, of course, logistics of how the furniture or certain key components will get to that site. And then there is another challenge of who will build out in the third party countries based on our drawing. So at the same time, your drawings, developments, specifications, your technical MEP has to be of a standard that can be easily executed while sitting here in India, because we are not in a situation where we are standing at site and giving instructions. It's all through drawings and technical information. So it also helped us, develop the skills and standards to do this. So we developed a system of, what is the base drawing, what are the specifications for that particular market, who are the contractors who are going to look at it, what are the technical standards of that particular mall. So these are 5 levels of integration that need to be put back into what is assumed to be a standard set of drawing. So actually, the standard is the sort of DNA has to still remain the same, but the drawings are done absolutely fresh every time over. So those are the sort of challenges that we faced while doing these sites and offshore locations.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Anybody else who wants to ask a question?
Yes, sir. I have one question.
Yeah.
Yeah, hello, sir. I'm Shivangi here. I'm from level 6, and I don't know if I'll be able to frame this right or not. So early on, when you started explaining this project, so you talked about the concept development and all that stuff. So usually when there's this client and there's this brief that they talk about what all they want in their project. So there is all this requirement that they tell, and then a concept is built and everything, a brief is built according to that. But initially, when you said when you had no client in the beginning, and you yourself had started imagining the space. So, can you please explain to me or help me explain, like, what all can you think about in concept development? Because as I see you, sometimes what I have faced that once one would start with some concept, and then because most parts the site also, I mean, uh, how do I put it, plays an important part, because you are thinking of something, but there are some things, there's restrictions which maybe a site put forth. So, what all can you bit explain to me in that, how one would see as a concept, and what all would be included in that, and how would you put in the brief that is given, or in if you're thinking in the design brief as itself. So,
that's a good question. Just give me a second. Okay, let me quickly share my screen, and I'll show you. Now, this is a little more detail on that initial concept that we did internally. And so once I show you this, you'll get a good idea on what all thoughts were in our mind when we were actually framing that idea. So just let me share my screen again. Yeah, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, 1 second. Sorry. Yeah. So basically, this is the same document from, we did the initial concept. So if you see, while we were doing these visual ideas, we were also looking at different things that need to be, or at least stating the problem. So if you look at what is the target profile, what type of people are we looking at? What is the sort of sense of place that we want to create? What is the concept, theme, and design language? So without actually getting into what the end result is, the half the problem is defined by asking the right, or at least defining the right questions. Because once you've defined the right question, then you can find the right people who have better expertise to address the answers. Because our role, so if you look at F&B constituents, so we said, okay, there's coffee, there could be also tea, there could be juice, there could be confectionery, healthy meal combinations, there could even be ice cream, there could even be in wine and cheese. So these are, putting the questions on the table so that we can find the right people to actually address this. So when we get into a design process and through research, you will find that it is not only the physical manifestation of what you're trying to do. There's a lot of back end that needs to be looked at. So what are this is more design, but then you also need to look at things like cutlery, custom elements, staff uniforms, your merchandise displays, and so then you have to look at the furniture. Maybe you're looking at merchandise, like coffee mugs, percolators. So this is something we did without having a client. But if you look at where Barista journey actually went, it actually addressed each of these ideas in a researched way. So once we had a client, the client set up a team with experts who could answer these questions. So it's not that you have to solve everything yourself. You have to be open. So like I mentioned in the end, that it is ultimately a co-created venture that actually becomes more successful than an individual. It's not an individual effort. The first 3 weeks, it is never an individual exercise. It is always teamwork that actually sort of takes a project to its successful launch and sustenance as such. So I hope that answered some of your queries.
Yes, definitely, sir. Thank you so much.
Rohit, I just wanted you to go back to that page which had that chair.
Okay.
Yeah, this one. So my question to you is that the seat of the chair, is it is it inspired by the filter? The coffee filter?
Absolutely.
So I want you to say that to the students to show how the connections are made.
So basically, if you see this design, so this was at a time where we were experimenting with software, doing 3D modeling, and also so this is like a filter, coffee filter, and then of course there's a lot of things going in and out. So that if we had, and this is the bar stool, if you see here, at the bar counter. So we said we want something. So in those days it was really good. You didn't get a lot of. You had very limited access to catalogs. Here, so you ended up because it used to be faster to design it yourself than to pick out something from a catalog. So that also is an art which is dying out, because generally, even sometimes we do it, that today you design a cafe and the furniture is all out of a catalog. So ultimately the furniture that comes in is what is available locally in the market at the cheapest price. So ultimately all the cafes start having a similar set of furniture because that's what's available in the market. So this is a method that so you get away from standard catalog based selection into actual design of elements.
So what is very interesting in what you said is that in the earlier days, even though you were making a chain, you could say that every element was bespoke.
Absolutely.
Whereas today, even if you are trying to do something exclusive, you end up, just ordering out of a catalog, as you said, simply because it's cheaper and it's faster.
So that is where the client needs to be sort of educated to move in that direction, that everything does not need to come out of a catalog.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the fun of designing is, where that you can actually create unique or let's say customized products.
Gives it a unique identity.
Yeah, absolutely. Any more questions from the students? What about L4 students? If there are no more questions, then we've reached the 1 hour usual time slot. Sachin had very gracefully said we can carry on if there are more questions. But I know Rohit is working. He's busy at his office in Gurgaon. In fact, you can see behind him a lot of models. So Rohit was showing me these models to understand for the students that model making is not something that happens only in design studios or rather in design colleges. It's part and parcel of a good office's way of working. And this is what I'm, going to emphasize right here. And you can see the evidence. This is not a stage set. He's sitting in his own office, and he's actually taken over a space where I guess there aren't anybody else that he can disturb. So that's why he's here. So it's important to know that model making is very much part of the design evolution. Okay, so any more questions, or do we now call it a day and let Rohit get back to work? Yeah.
Hello, sir. This is Bhakti here.
Yeah, hi.
I would like to ask a question. So, sir, like, if I first of all, I would like to ask you that apart from the design thing, how did you like to open a cafe? It's very important to see other factors like the food. I mean, in your case, the coffee and everything. Like, how did you like manage to look upon to that factors? Because of course, your main focus could be the concept and designing and everything.
Like I mentioned in the beginning, that while the client put us to the task of designing the pilot store, in the same building, he actually first set up a training academy for people and staff to learn about coffee. And I think it took about 4 months or 5 months till we actually got the site, till we finished the pilot store. But in parallel, the client's team was actually working on a daily basis on perfecting how to make the perfect cup of coffee. So that was a separate team. So while we used to go to meet the client, to show our designs and all, every time they said, okay, now taste this, taste that. So, user feedback was taken. So that aspect, I would say, is as important, if not even more important than the physical space, because that is, I would say, the critical part of the venture. And that is something where our role was not there it was a very minuscule role, but that is something the client had to invest in parallel. So it was not just it's not like a restaurant today where you just pick up a coffee machine and put it there and start punching it out. The coffee, how the coffee would be sourced, based on that sourced coffee, you have to create the right recipes which would be suited to the Indian taste and palate. Set up the logistics for that supply of the coffee, and then train your baristas and team to actually make that cup of coffee in a consistent manner 2,000 times a day. So that is I would say, significant effort, and we had very little role in that, but that is something the client definitely understood, and that is what goes into running a successful coffee chain, and a very critical part is.
Yes, sir. Yes. Okay, thank you for letting me know that. And
so there's a lot going behind the scenes than just this.
Yes, sir. And so, like, I also have one more question.
Yeah, tell me.
It's that to like start a cafe, is it important? Like, it's of course not important, but what would you prefer? Like, a sole proprietor can do it, or like a partnership would be more better, like in case of investment as well, and if we see the other factors as well. Being a sole proprietor, can I can of course start. I mean, there would be more challenges, but like, what would you prefer? I should have someone with me, so that like partnership.
I think, see, one is having the money is one part of the game, but I think you need, whether it's on a partnership basis or running, you need a good team. I wouldn't like to qualify whether the team is part of the ownership or not, but I think what is most successful in any venture or any project is having the right team with the right expertise in place. So, like when 20 years back, our client had to actually find the right people one by one, and set up a team. These days, it's probably not as difficult, because a lot more people with expertise available. So, of course, if you have other people who are taking stake in the venture, then you basically have an opportunity to reduce your risk and profits. So it's a risk-reward situation that you need to validate. So it's different in every situation. So you can't generalize this answer actually. But I think what is more critical is to have the right team in place.
Actually, what this means in this discussion is that the client has to be committed and is equally interested in the final product as the designer would be. You can't have a client who is not as willing to go the whole hog and expect just the interior is going to do the trick. So it is, as Rohit has been saying, it is a joint effort.
So we are only, I would say, 20% of the game is the designer's role. 80%, of course, you need the money to back it up. But 80% is, I would still give credit to operations and other aspects, because we've done so many restaurants and all. Unless you have a dedicated team, it's not a business. First, it has to become a passion, and then you can convert it into a business and not the other way around.
Yeah.
That's Absolutely. Very important.
Absolutely. So do we have any more questions? Thank you, Bhakti. Any more questions from students?
I can ask a very quick question. This is Simran. So what I wanted to understand is, of course, when the client came on board, there was this level of research that you conducted where you looked at other cafes that were sort of following the same program that you wanted to incorporate in Barista. And you did that level of research. When Barista became an international venture and you started opening it in different locations, so like, for instance, say the Barista in Bahrain. So while you were looking at that, was there any sort of research on the basis of context that influenced the design? Like while answering Shambhavi's question, you already mentioned that there was a research that you did in terms of materials and vendors available. But besides that, is there any sort of contextual research which influenced the design?
Yes, the sort of color palette we modified to, and things like that were based on some amount of research of that local culture and things like that. So some of it came through the team that was based out of there, the franchise partners and the operations team. So they used to keep giving us feedback on how to tweak the design. And of course, in terms of colors also, you would have noticed that some of colors also underwent a sort of evolution in that sense, that so that market is a little more sophisticated. So the colors don't need to be all orange like we earlier used to do in India. The orange became more subtle and more timber and more sophisticated textures started being used. So so those sort of cues of it being a little less mass market brand, it did happen. So one has to understand these subtle things that so basically even today, if you see, you get a McDonald's and say the Plaza of Milan, which has no red in it. It has a black background rather than a red background, because that's the cue you are trying to say that you are not McDonald's, you are something better than that. So even McDonald's transforms itself in certain key situations. So I think if you can be flexible to the context, I think it will only be a positive move rather than just saying that, no, what I've been doing for 20 years is the right thing. So I think one should change with the context, not completely, but a little bit at least.
Thank you.
So I guess there probably aren't any more questions. Is that right? Anybody? Last question? Otherwise, I leave it to Sachin to do his vote of thanks. But my personal thanks again, Rohit, for taking out time.
thank you for prodding me. At least got all my old data in one place.
Yeah, and also it must have been fun revisiting that whole story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's great fun to look back at old projects which you've forgotten about partly.
Yeah.
So yeah. No, but thanks a ton. And so Sachin, over to you. And thank you again, Rohit.
Thank you, Rohit, sir, for coming, for sparing your time. I am thrilled to understand the complete story about Barista. Now, if I go to Barista any longer, I'm sure I'm going to be excited about the way it has come all over those 20 years, and I know who built it. In the same way, I know that those mudras on the international airport are being built by Incubis. I always say that this is something I know, somebody I know very well has built it. So similarly, I am really proud of feeling the fact that Barista also is one of those projects, the prominent projects that Incubis must be proud of. I take the pinch of this, and rather thank you again to the deepest portion of my heart for bringing in all that knowledge and sparing your time. And I request you to be in touch with us, keep guiding us the way you have been doing, and all credit goes to Snehanshu sir for following up with you.
Yeah, so thank you so much for this opportunity to be with all of you, and I look forward to interacting more with IIAD in the days to come, and hope this COVID nonsense reduces so we can come and see you in your studios. So
exactly, sir. Exactly.
That would be really nice. Yeah. Thank you.
The way we are interacting now and the way we have interacted in the HR summit is a lot different. Very less in terms of the interaction, more of speaking, and especially from your side or from Snehanshu's side. But anyways, thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, sir.